Good afternoon and welcome to this year's International Women's Day event. My name is Khadija Saleh and I am a French MPA student at Harvard Kennedy School and a participant in From Harvard Square to the Oval Office nonpartisan political training program of the Women and Public Policy program. So before we start, we wanted to offer a land acknowledgement to honor local indigenous communities on the land where Harvard University sits, which is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary unceded homeland of the Massachusetts people, the surviving descendants of the first people of Massachusetts and of the Neponset Band of the Massachusetts. This year's theme on International Women's Day is Break the Bias, where we strive to imagine a gender equal world without bias or discrimination. We are pleased to be highlighting 4 women leaders today who will discuss how to raise awareness against gender bias and discrimination, but also identify how to take action towards equality in politics, the workplace, and beyond. So I am honored today to introduce you our 4 panelists. Firstly, our moderator for the conversation is Professor Iris Bohnet. Iris Bohnet is the Albert Pratt Professor of Business and Government and the co-director of the Women in Public Policy program at Harvard Kennedy School. She's a behavioral economist, combining insights from economics and psychology to improve decision-making in organizations and society, often with a gender or cross-cultural perspective. She's the author of the award-winning book, What Works? Gender Equality by Design, and advises governments and companies on gender equity around the world. Carmen Yulín Cruz is the former mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and the author of El Poder Está en la Calle, Power is in the Streets. She was elected San Juan's mayor in 2012, defeating a 12-year incumbent, and came to national prominence in 2017 as an outspoken advocate for federal support to Puerto Rico in the wake of Hurricane Maria. In 2018, Time magazine named her to its list of 100 most influential people. Julene is currently a leader in practice at the Women in Public Policy program and Hauser Leader at the Harvard Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership. Lori Ehrlich is the Federal Emergency Management Agency Region 1 Regional Administrator. Prior to her appointment, Lori had a 14-year tenure as a Massachusetts state representative, serving in leadership roles as chair of the Joint Committee on Municipalities and Regional Governments and the Joint Committee on Export Development. Lori earned a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. Deepa Purushothaman is the author of The First, the Few, the Only, How Women of Color Can Redefine Power in Corporate America, and the co-founder of Information, a company which provides a brave, safe, and new space for professionals who are women of color. Prior to this, Deepa spent more than 20 years at Deloitte and was a first, an Indian American woman and one of the youngest people to make partner in the company's history. Deepa is also a Women in Public Policy program leader in practice at the Harvard Kennedy School. Professor Bohnet will lead this conversation for 45 minutes, and then we will have 15 minutes for Q&A with the virtual audience. So please add your questions to the Q&A function on the Zoom webinar, and Professor Bohnet will direct them to the panelists. Thank you so much to our panelists and moderator for joining us today, and we look forward to this great conversation. And I will now pass the virtual mic to Professor Bohnet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I was just unmuted, so now I have a voice again. Wonderful to see you all. I'm so glad we could first see everyone as you were entering the room, so we get a bit of feeling of the community, and I know we're all missing seeing each other. So thank you. Thank you for joining us for this special occasion for International Women's Day. It really is lovely to see many of you, and I am super delighted to be on this amazing panel with our 3, I wanted to say guests, but that's really wrong. These are insiders who have played such an important role at the Women in Public Policy program at the Kennedy School, from Harvard Square to the Oval Office. I mean, so many paths have crossed already with us here at WAPPP, but also with many of you in the audience. So a warm welcome to Julene, to Lori, to Deepa. I'm just excited to be on this panel here with you. So Break the Bias is very close to my heart, of course, close to my research, close to what we're doing here at the Women in Public Policy program. And what we thought we would do is we would have a bit of a conversation for the first part of this hour that we have together, and then we'll open the floor to all of you, and please chat in, please send me your questions by chat, and I am very happy then to share them with our experts. I thought the first round of questions, the first two really rounds of questions, could focus on the two ways in which we can break the bias. And that's not meant to be conclusive, but it is broadly how we think about breaking the bias here at WAPPP. One is that clearly we as individuals have a responsibility, have a part to play. We have to, in many ways, break the bias ourselves as we are climbing career ladders, as we enter halls of power in the different spheres that our experts are in. So I'll talk a bit about how these three women leaders have done that and kind of navigating the field as it is in many ways. And then secondly, we definitely want to spend some real time talking about the structural barriers, about what we can do to change the system so that we no longer have to do this kind of work as individuals, but in fact can level the playing field around us and truly create equal opportunities, equal outcomes, and equal processes for everyone. And with that, I'm gonna go right into things and turn to Laurie with my first question. I mean, the turning is kind of, you know, not so literal, but I am kind of turning to you and looking at you now with the first question. So Laurie, you have been an advocate for other women for a very long time. You've been helping women find their own voice. And of course, you have decided to run for public office and have served in public office. So tell us a bit more about how you found your own voice, and then also a bit about how you helped others find their voice.
Well, thank you, Eris. That's a beautiful question. And just allow me to say thank you to everybody who worked so hard to organize this. Ruth and Nicole and Khadija, what a beautiful introduction. I am so honored to appear on this panel. I'm really, truly humbled to sit among you amazing women. So just one really interesting way that Eris introduced us as insiders. Note that, because there was no place where we could be insiders truly until, you know, since recent years. And my story is one of, you know, just being just you know, going back to 1997 when I was a mom of little children, and I realized that my family was in danger. And the danger was a coal burning power plant right nearby. And the way I discovered it was these my two daughters had run around the kitchen table and left a trail of little black footprints on the white tiles of the kitchen floor. And at first I was annoyed because I was working and I didn't want to clean the floor. And then I went and checked them out and they were greasy. So one thing led to another. I ended up calling up the local power plant and saying, hey, are you guys poisoning us? They sent an insurance adjuster. They told me, you know, good news, we're going to power wash your deck for you. And I just said, nothing doing. And at that moment, when they offered to power wash my deck in exchange for my signature that I'll never sue them, I found my voice really fast. And my way of finding my voice was organizing my community, speaking out in my newspaper, knocking on the doors of the State House, and realizing that, you know, it was an old boys club I was knocking on the doors of. And I was being patted on the head a little bit, and I was not inside the room where the decisions were made. And you know what they say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I wanted, you know, I worked really hard as an activist for a lot of years. I ended up, you know, organizing the community to shut down the coal plant. I ended up cleaning up a drinking water supply, leading the charge to cleaning up the drinking water for 80,000 people that had 6 feet of coal waste at the bottom. And through this journey, before I ever arrived at the Kennedy School, I found my voice. And I also encountered a lot of people who didn't want to hear my voice. And to develop that manner where you can be heard without being shut out is really an art form that, you know, takes years to develop, I think. But there is a balance that you have to strike, and you have to, you know, make sure that you're heard, and you have to be persistent and patient and all of those things. But once I did run for office, thank you, Kennedy School, thank you from Harvard Square to the Oval Office, I realized that in the State House, it was so important that my voice was heard. And I joined the Women's Caucus, and the Women's Caucus is bipartisan, and it exists just to make sure that women's voices are heard. So I think, you know, and then you also have to reach back into your community and visit kindergarten classes and visit third graders, and, you know, even just being a woman in elected office, standing in front of a child full of little boys and little girls. The boys need to see women in leadership roles just as much as the little girls do. So I think being in the community, really truly just being an elected woman, is your first step to really making change and empowering other women. And other women could be little kindergartners and little third graders, because they will be women. They will be those women eventually. So I don't know, my journey was, you know, definitely driven by a lot of hormones and, you know, a lot of female camaraderie, and the program at the Kennedy School really helping me, you know, have the tools to know how to run for office. So I had the confidence to do so. So it's been quite a journey, but one I could not be more proud of. And to land here to talk to all of you, thanks everybody who's attending. You know, I'm just so honored. So so hopefully that answers your question. Okay, Iris.
Well, thank you so much, Laura, for this you know, sad, really, but inspiring story at the same time, where, you know, tragedy really helped you find your voice, or forced you in many ways to find your voice. And I'm starting to see that this, again, unfortunately, is a bit of a theme of our discussion today, because Julene, while she had a voice beforehand, a particular tragedy also made her have an even bigger voice. But before we go there to that very bigger voice, and how you really stood up for San Juan and Puerto Rico, Julene, tell us a bit more about how you decided to run for public office, unseating somebody who had been serving for quite some time with a grassroots campaign, and really mobilization of so many people.
Well, first of all, congratulations to everyone that is here. We have made it another year. And I just want to give a soulful shout out to not only the women in Ukraine that today are fighting for their family and their country, but the women in Selma, Alabama. I just visited Selma this weekend with LaTosha Brown, another Hauser leader, and there's still a fight that maybe doesn't get in the news every day, but it's still not less important than that. Let me just tell you a little bit. I was blessed and shielded by two women of very strong character. So when people say I have a strong character, I think you should meet my mother and my grandmother. And they would always be telling me two things. Speak, my mother would tell me, and my grandmother would say, speak up. Speak up. All the time, I kept hearing that. And there's also a sense in my house that you had to pay it forward. That if you move forward just for your benefit, but you didn't bring people with you, it was not the right thing. My grandmother was a very poor woman. I'm the great-granddaughter of a sugarcane plantation worker. And my grandmother became the founding director of the School of Physical Therapy in Puerto Rico. And during the weekends, because she had been poor herself, she would make Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I guess it would be gumbo, similar to gumbo, but with just meat, no seafood. And students would come in and just show their ID, and they could come in and eat lunch and dinner at her house. So I grew up seeing that over and over. My parents would wake me up every year at 3 o'clock in the morning so that we could sit in front of of the sugarcane plantations and see them from afar. And when the whistle would blow at 6 in the morning, they would give us a little piece of bread and the top of the thermos and say, this is what you would be eating if you were there, because that's all you would have. And they would make a point of making sure they were activists, all of them, political activists, and they would make a point of taking us along. So I grew up thinking that your life really had no true meaning unless you were doing something for others, to the point that every year I had to give up my favorite doll. And I'm saying this because Lori was talking about her kids, right? And the way that we model as women and parents and fathers too, but mostly, unfortunately, this falls with women with no additional help. The way that we model sticks with us and becomes part of the people that we are growing with, our children, right? So I identified, my family identified a lot with the first mayor of San Juan, which in fact, she was never mayor. She was never elected mayor. She was appointed city administrator, and everyone called her mayor at the time because she helped the poor. So when I was little, my grandmother would make me repeat that yo quiero ser alcaldesa de San Juan. I couldn't even say alcaldesa, which means mayor. She would make me repeat that. What are you going to be? Alcaldesa. So there was this thing. I don't think she did it. It was like her own mini version of the Oval Office. It was just to, you walk into a room like you own it. You walk into a room like you own it. And just very briefly, I'm very small. I'm 4'11" and a half. I tell people I'm 5 feet, just, what's another little bit. But I used to get roughed around in the sandbox. And literally, my grandmother told me once, you never start a fight, but you finish it all. And I stood up to the little kid, who's now a very famous politician in Puerto Rico, by the way. I stood up to the little kid. He stopped, roughing me up. And this is very important for something that I've read related to Deepa, and Lori mentioned it a little. My grandmother went to pick me up. And she said to the teacher, what happened? She looks at me, she says, did you defend yourself? Yes. Did you start the fight? No. Did you finish the fight? Yes. Well, I don't see any problems here. And you did the right thing. Let's go for ice cream. What she did there, and then the value of solidarity, the value of having someone telling me that I had the right to stand up for myself and teaching me that, modeling that for me. It is so incredible that maybe 45 years later, I'm still saying that. So I always knew that the way to run for, the way to do things was to help people. But then very briefly, I started working with other politicians, and I was the echo of their voices. And they were going one way and the people's needs were going another way. And I thought, I don't want to be the echo of a politician's voice. I want to be the megaphone by which people's voices are heard. And that's when I decided to run for office. I don't come from political royalty, right? And no one in my family has ever run for office. My parents mortgaged their home twice so I could go to Boston University the first 2 years, and then I got scholarships. So I'm a little woman, petite, but I was always taught that you can never underestimate the power of one voice, because if that voice resonates in the hearts and hopes of people, it will galvanize and it will unleash a power so incredible that it cannot be stopped.
Oh, thank you, Julene. This was beautiful. And I'm already seeing, these themes emerging here, as in being the voice, but also being the voice for others and having other voices support you. In many ways, I think that's our first call to action for everyone who's joining us today. Try to be the voice for somebody. Try to be that grandmother who asserts you, who is your, I mean, we now call this micro sponsors, as in, who is your micro sponsor, right? In the moment when you are interrupted, when you're not given credit in the meeting, when you're not taken seriously, when you need that other person kind of elevating, being that megaphone of your voice. So thank you for sharing that. And Deepa, so you have obviously with your new book, which is incredibly exciting, taken that choice also to be the voice, in particular of women of color, after a very successful career in corporate America, where you also were the first in many ways, the first Indian American woman to make partner at Deloitte, also one of the youngest partners, I understand. And where you broke down barriers and have used your voice internally in a number of women's networks, diversity initiatives in your corporate practice, of course. So tell us a bit more about how you decided to choose a career in consulting and then more recently leave consulting courageously and become an author.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm also humbled to be on this panel with everybody. I have to say I'm 5'1", so I love the references to being a petite woman because it's not easy, and that's not what people think of as power when they look at us, right? But yeah, so I spent 21 years in corporate America. I left a little bit less than 2 years ago, and Iris, my intention was not that forward-looking. Like, I did not know I was going to be in corporate America for that long. I actually recruited out of HBS when I was at Kennedy School, and I thought I want 1 or 2 years of private sector experience. My background had been politics, and then I'll come back. And I spent 21 years, and I rose, and I had opportunities, and I learned a lot. And it was such a fast-paced, really exciting, interesting place to be. I think, along the way, I started to have growing questions around my purpose. That was always there. I think that, the last elections and the elections before that really grew that sort of questioning of, am I in the right place? What am I doing? The last 3 years of my career, I started to have a number of sicknesses that showed up. And so for me, it also became a health crisis that kind of pushed me to ask different questions about, one, am I doing the right thing? Is this what I want to be doing with my life? And then, is this even healthy for me? And so those things really came to this kind of head point or this nexus. And I think for 3 years probably wanted to leave, to be honest with you. And not because anything wrong with my career, but it just got to the point where I wanted to make different choices. And I really felt this strong calling to really focus on women of color's experiences, especially in the corporate space, because for me, that had become like a growing issue prior to being on the main stage that it is now. And so I really thought of leaving. And my challenge was, as a first, I felt like there were a lot of eyes on me. So in a 100,000 person organization, I was known by my first name. Like, I had that sort of brand. And so I felt very responsible, not only to myself and were people going to think I failed, but would people look at the other women of color coming up after me and have those same sorts of questions? So in an attempt to figure out what to do and how to maybe release some of that responsibility that I didn't even have words for. And by the way, in my research, I found a lot of women of color carry that sense of responsibility, not as a bad thing, but it's just part of who we are and part of what we want to do. And I saw it as, I was grateful for it, but it also comes with a negative side that we have to talk about. I started meeting with women of color. It started one-on-one, then quickly grew to about a dozen dinners I did across the country with 20, 30 women of color each, all senior level, not women that I knew. I reached out to them cold over LinkedIn or through friends of friends. And we would get into these rooms and I thought, I'm looking for stay or go. I'm looking for, like, where does one go at a senior level after a few decades of being in this bubble? Do I want to go do something else completely? And we would get in these rooms and have conversations I'd never had before about the challenges and the opportunities of being a woman of color navigating corporate spaces. And I saw challenges around code switching. I saw challenges around microaggressions and racism. I saw challenges around just finding our voice and what it meant to have all eyes on us. And so coming out of those dinners, I felt a really strong responsibility, a different kind of responsibility to share their stories and to really do something different. And those conversations became the fodder for the book. And I ended up interviewing over 500 women of color to write the book in the last few years, but also became the basis for the company. So the company is really, helping create that sort of safe space for these conversations around advancement and growth for women of color. And so it's been really exciting. It was not easy. It was not a career I was intentional about. And 20 years later, I don't know that I knew how quickly it would go. But I also feel like part of when you get to a certain point is there's a real blessing in following your path and finding your purpose. And I just, for whatever reason, feel very strongly right now that I'm in a position where I can hold the container to share other stories, and that we need many more of us in corporate America to share what it's like. And, you know, again, the positives and the negatives so that we can make it better for everybody. And now I feel very strongly my work is really about helping make workplaces work for all, because that is not a conversation we've had really fully until this time. And the last few years have given us a chance to really talk about what that means, because I don't think it's not just working for women of color, for mothers. I think it's also not working for white male leaders either. Like, I think everyone's struggling with the place that work is taken in all of our lives in the corporate space. So I'm really excited to have stepped into it, and really thankful for what's shown up.
Well, thank you so much for leading that work, and to all three of you for being a megaphone for those who might not normally have that kind of voice or aren't in the room. And I know all of you are working on helping other people have voice, but also changing institutions so that people more naturally can have that voice. And maybe I can start with Julene at this point. You have done so many things in Puerto Rico, in San Juan, as the mayor. You've worked on LGBTQ rights, you've worked on immigrant rights, and of course you had to deal with incredible natural disasters, hurricanes, which brought devastation to your country, to your island, I should say. But and you have really focused also on kind of, so how do we change the landscape here? Literally the landscape, but also kind of the policies around us to make it easier for women and really everyone to have a decent life. So tell us a bit more about your more systemic approaches.
Well, one of the things that I did to beat a 12-year incumbent who was very powerful, it was a very powerful politician. I love that you two have the same drink that I drink. I'm loving it, you know. Yes, but he was a very powerful politician, and the party that I still am associated with, the Popular Democratic Party, did not want me to be the candidate because I was too liberal. So the
literally, wow.
Yes, the then candidate, the director of the committee said that told me that I would blemish their ballot because I was too liberal, right? And what he meant is that I would talk to the teachers, the unions, the students, the immigrants, the LGBTQI plus community, which at the time was just LGBTQ, and I would talk to anyone. And one of the things that I did is I had a particular interesting situation because they named two other candidates before me. And as fate would have it, they had to drop out for whatever reason. The last one was 7 months before the election. I was running to be reelected to the House of Representatives. And this ties in, he had to step out, and then the Electoral Commission did not let me switch what I was running from. So I campaigned for 5 months. And you're going to say, well, from the Oval perspective, it's impossible. No, because every day is a campaign. When you're doing it right, every day is a campaign, because your campaign is what you're doing. Your agency is what you can share, not during the campaign, but every day. So one of the things that I did is I signed 21 collaboration agreements before the campaign. And I sat down just like Deepa did with all these women. And I sat down with the LGBTQI plus community, with the immigrant community, and 19 other communities. And the important thing is that I did not define community geographically. There was some of that there. So I said, look, yeah, I am going to be a politician, as you call it. And people mean that in a bad way when they call you a politician. So here's the number of things that I'm going to do for you after having people from our team go visit them and say, what is it that you want? What is it that you've been asking the mayor for? And for example, with the LGBT community, it was having the you have the power to say anyone is going to be considered a dependent in the medical plan of the municipality, no matter what the composition of the couple is. 2 men, 2 women, a man and a woman, it doesn't matter. Every time I signed an agreement like that, for example, for the immigrants, I said, I will set aside some money for immigrants that do not have the necessary papers to be in San Juan, not to have to wait 5 years to be able to enroll in medical programs, but to do it from the beginning. And I started using money, I was actually sued and won, to give prenatal care to immigrant women that did not have the necessary papers, which meant I had to make our health system a sanctuary. So no questions asked. But the first thing that I had to do was openly say, I am going to be that platform by which the voices of the LGBTQI+ community will be heard. And I am going to be that platform by which the immigrant community will be heard. I got criticized left and right. You're going to lose the election. Some people, there were a few death threats because, you don't do this in a machista and a chauvinistic society, right? Openly say, no, I am going to. And I started saying this, and I'll start bringing it back. I didn't say break the bias, but I said, how interesting it is to the members of the LGBTQI+ community. Politicians will take your money, but they don't want you standing next to them when the time is right. So they'll take your money. Your money is good enough for them. Why would you lend your voice, which is your vote, to people that will then advance causes that are against you? And most of the time they had no answers. So once I sent out all these 21 agreements and I blatantly said, this is what I'm doing, there was an unleashing of solidarity. And I love the way you say micro-sponsors. These communities became micro-sponsors, not of me, but of what me being in office would mean for them. And I think that's the trick. You may be in the ballot, but you have to represent what people want to see. They have to see themselves and their fights in you, or else there's no connection there. So it was very deliberate, but very defiant. And it was very defiant. I named the vice president of the municipal legislature was an openly gay activist. And I had transgender people sit with me openly. And for some people, this may not be a big deal, but this was 8 years ago in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So in the Latino communities, we still have to break a lot of barriers when it has to do to immigration and when it has to do with the LGBTQ rights. So it was basically a in-your-face mentality. It's in your face. Here we are. We have differences amongst us, and we're going to recognize them first, and we're going to make everyone have agency over their own destiny. I will be the platform and the vehicle for your agency to take form.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm already seeing, break the bias becomes break the barriers. In that also, right, these structural barriers that we're all facing. In fact, I want to just go back to you, Deepa, on that, because I know that's so close to your heart and to your book, The First, The Few, The Only, which has just come out this March. What advice do you have for organizations now that you've lived it for many years in an organization that in fact has been at the forefront? We should also acknowledge, right, of gender equity, one of the very early movers trying to do better in terms also of thinking about careers over time, over a lifetime, over work-life issues. So help us think a bit more about what we can do structurally within organizations.
Yes, the main message of the book, and I Today has been one of those days. I've literally done 7 back-to-back conversations with corporates because everyone wants to talk about this topic. Everyone's trying to do better. I think the main message that I want corporates to start thinking about, and I want even allies to start thinking about, who I call co-conspirators, because I need them to take action too, is this idea that corporate America is not a meritocracy. And we need to talk about it. We need to have permission to talk about that. We need to have that in bigger spaces. I think one of the hardest things that we don't understand, and we're just starting to break open this conversation slowly, is that we think the workplace shows up the same for all people, that you kind of enter and we're going to have the same experience. And the women of color I met with are struggling with things like, code switching, of the racism that we talked about, of having to do all these extra roles. And there's a very different experience that we have. And there hasn't really been space to talk about that. So really understanding some of the barriers within the system itself and talking about how we make change for that. I think the biggest issue that I see in the companies that I work with is that there is a disconnect between asking what do you need and then what is shared. So one is, I think we're still struggling with how we have conversations around race, right? That's just still early stages. We're still getting vocabulary for that. We've just started to talk about how race shows up in corporate spaces. So that's definitely one. I think second is, I'll sit with a lot of executives or leaders and they'll say, well, I ask my Black employees or I ask my Asian employees how it is, and they tell me. And I will then go meet with those same exact groups an hour later, and I get a completely different story. So I think we're still in the phase of the process where we're learning, right? And we're finding ways to have the conversation. And I don't think it's safe still for a lot of people of color and women of color to share their truth. There's a lot of retaliation and things that happen even in these corporate structures because the HR processes and policies aren't set up to really protect the individuals. They're set up to protect the company. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that space. But I also think we need to get more comfortable saying that companies are on the early stages of this. And I agree that there's lots of different levels of maturity, but I don't know of any company that doesn't have challenges, right? And I think it's just wrong to say there's no racism here, or there's nothing happening here. I think you're just not aware of what's happening at all the levels. And so part of it is finding ways to engage in the conversation and then taking action around it. But it starts with listening and making space for the conversations to happen. But there's so many, that's a 3-hour conversation in itself on what structures and what organizations need to do. But I do think it starts with listening and then kind of listening better and then kind of starting to take action on what some of those things could look like. But there's a long way to go. And I think we're just in the beginning of even being able to have those conversations in corporate, because we want to believe that, capitalism and corporate America is somehow, operates in this very separate structure, but it doesn't. It's part of society. It has all the biases that come with society, but that's such a new conversation for so many people.
Yeah, I completely appreciate that. And I would actually even say it's broader than corporate America, right? It really crosses sectors, right?
Absolutely.
An agency in Washington could have very same biases. An NGO could have the very same biases. So we all have to really work on this collectively. And before I bring it back to Lori, I wanted to invite all of you to please send me your questions by chat. So please go to the chat function, type in anything for any of the speakers. If you include a name, I'm very happy to specifically ask one of our panelists. If you are, if this is for all of us or more generically, I'm also happy just to put it to everyone. But while you're working on that, I wanted to bring it back to you, Lori, and bring it back to politics, because it is such an important megaphone that really can bring about change. And your passion, as you just already talked about in the introduction, has always been caring for the environment, thinking about sustainability, energy conservation, these topics. But you also have brought us together with kind of women being at the table, and importantly, women being at the table and your own experience, as a mother kind of suggests that maybe that very directly might have motivated you in that moment, at least, to take action. So tell us a bit more about the bills that you worked on and, also what it was like for a woman to be in politics.
So what a great way to ask a question. That was perfect. The name of Deepa's book is so perfect. Also, I was the only in so many rooms. And once you accept that uncomfortable feeling like you're the only one in the room, you realize that your purpose there is so important, more important than any other single person in that room. And you have to not only, once you have found your voice, you have to maintain your voice. And I think that is a responsibility of women who have found their voice. And it's not easy to maintain your voice. I was awakened to a danger, and through that I had headlines screaming about this activist mom. I was called Mother Grizzly from Marblehead. I was called the East Coast Erin Brockovich, you know, and here I was saying, okay, I've done this thing. I've had some success with it. I've organized my community. Now I want to make the change and go into politics. My first election, you know, I had many elections over the course of 14 years, but my first one was such an eye opener, and it's such a great baseline for really how far we've come. And even though we've had so many setbacks as women, you know, the first time out, I had people asking me, who's going to be home with the children? I had people saying, who's going to cook dinner? I had people saying, why would you ever want to go into politics as a woman? And if that isn't a question that screams that you should go into politics as a woman to change it, I don't know what else is. But I'm the first woman to ever serve as the state representative from my district. Once I was in the legislature, I was the first chair of certain committees. You know, there's a lot of firsts along the way, and each one comes with different responsibilities. Now I'm the first woman to be the regional administrator for FEMA for all of New England. And, you know, with that, it's your voice still, but, you know, you're leading in a different way, each leadership role along the way, but they're all important and they're all essential. And you know what else? Following your passions, because, you know, I've gone in a lot of different directions. I started out as a CPA, and you know, my life has taken so many crazy turns. And it's so, if you know me, you know that I have a lot of passion and I follow those passions. And I don't think that's, if I see something, I don't think that somebody's taking care of it necessarily. I ask questions. I say, can we do this better? And I think that's how leaders develop. I think that's an important role for us, to ask those questions. We see things differently. And then when you're in a room where policy is being discussed, women bring something to the table that is because of our upbringing, because of who we are, that the policy that comes out of that room that we were in with a lot of men is so much better. I've seen this happen so many times, over and over and over again, where we say, hey, maybe we could do it this way, or maybe, you know, let's look at it from a different viewpoint. And for the most part, the guys that I've worked with, you know, in the State House were grateful for the input. Sure, I've felt, you know, like the only person, the only one in a lot of rooms, but once you realize that, you know, you can make it better, and if that policy is improved, life for a lot of people is improved as well. So it's an intense responsibility if you think about it too much. But let me just end with this. It is a great way to live a life. And if you're thinking about going into politics and you have a passion, whether it's energy policy, the environment, or anything else, truly, the fact that you are a woman standing up for something you believe in and the people that something affects, you are taking an important step to help others, but you're also launching yourself into a great life. So just want to share that with you. There's things that you'll get out of it that you never expected. There's people you'll meet that that will blow your mind and say, I can't believe I'm in the same room with this person. And there are conversations that you'll have that your brain will expand. I mean, you'll just say, wow, I hadn't thought about that. And if I hadn't have, you know, when I saw those little footprints on the kitchen floor, if I had just said, oh, what a mess, you know, I'm busy, I'm just gonna go clean them up and then get on with my life, you know, I wouldn't be in front of you guys. I would, you know, it's so my message is just, you know what, go for it. Just go for it. There's so much to gain. Society will be better for it. Your community will be better for it, and you'll have a great life.
Thank you, Lori. I see Julene beaming as you were speaking. But in fact, I do actually want to build on that with a question from Brittany, which is quite directly related to both of your testimonies, Julene and Lori. And that is, yes, politics is so important, but many people have lost trust in politics. And she's especially thinking about Japan. But I think it's right. It's a more general question. It's everywhere. It's here in the US. It's in Europe. It's everywhere. So can you give us some inspiration on how we can bring some of that trust back into politics? That's Brittany's question. Thank you, Brittany.
Julene, why don't you go?
Yeah, yes. First of all, Laura, you're going to make me want to run for office again. Because there's something that Lori said and something that Deepa said, that once you find that your voice is a platform, you have a responsibility to keep it. And I'll just share with you two very little examples that say why it is worth it. After the hurricane, somebody got to the Coliseum where I was living and staying, and they said there's a child that is a genius that lives in one of the mountains, and lost his home. So you have to go see him, and so I went to see the child, and this child had 79. I'll never forget. I have 79 books, Mayor, and the only book that I have left is my astronomy book. So I need some help, and I thought, here's this child who's concerned about, do any of us know exactly how many books we own? This child knew exactly what books he owned, how many books he owned. And he said to me, because if I go to school, I'll be able to help my mom, who was an undocumented, not illegal. Humans are not illegal. They're undocumented. And I looked at him, and we rebuilt his home for him. And while we were rebuilding his home for him, he would come home every afternoon and would stay there talking to the workers that were rebuilding his home. And towards the end, and this, that Lori and Deepa both have mentioned this, I said, okay, the home is done. And we went to see it with the closest staff, and my communications director kept saying, mm-mm. And I said, oh, look at how beautiful the kitchen is. The home is done. And she would go, uh-uh. And I turned around and said, what are you uh-uhing about? What is your problem? She said, it's not my problem. She doesn't have a washer and a dryer. So when she comes home from her second job, she's going to have to just, where is she going to wash the clothes for these children to go to school the next day? And I thought everybody got quiet, because this is the communications director standing up to me and saying, no, it's not done. And I said, what do you suggest? And she said, buy her a washer and a dryer. So we looked for a washer and a dryer that were gas, so they wouldn't increase the cost of her electricity or her electrical bill. So it's little things like that. It's also, every time I'm giving a speech, and this has happened to Lori, to Deepa, and to you, Iris, if there's a woman in the audience that has a small child, and the child starts making noise, people, women included, look at her like, take the child away. And whenever she stands up and takes the child away, I said, wait a minute, ma'am, do not leave the room. Why is it that always the women have to leave the room? If there is anyone here that is annoyed by your child, let them leave the room. And unbeknownst, the woman smiles, because again, I love it how Deepa calls them co-conspirators, but you do change people's lives. Politicians may go astray, but politics, it's about leading with your heart and going where your heart leads you. It's about making people not only survive, but thrive. It's about trying to be equalizers and taking as many people as we can to the starting block with as much of the same capabilities. And then what we do in the race, it's up to each one of us. But I have seen, and I say this and I start getting, it is because I had a political platform and I could repeat for the world to hear what was happening in Puerto Rico, that maybe more people did not die. 3,000 of us died. And maybe I could have slept one less hour. Maybe I could have eaten one less meal. And I play this what if game. But I guarantee you, it is the anguish of having the power to help and not doing it that will stay with you forever. When you have the power to do something to change someone's lives and you don't do it, then you're using power for the wrong reason. But I see the light that comes out of people when they are heard, when they're acknowledged, when they're seen. And it's beautiful. That doesn't mean it's not painful at times. And that doesn't mean you don't pay the price at times, but it's worth it. It's worth it to be that little spark that makes sure that people can paint their life with brighter colors in their palette.
Thank you so much, Julene. Laura, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Julene is a perfect example of building trust through action. And I think, there is a very big problem in politics globally. It's everywhere. But in the US, people have become very cynical about politics. And part of it, I think, is structural problems with the way we do politics. I think it's money in politics. I think it's lobbying efforts, which is related to the money. And, I just think the way we do things doesn't necessarily make the people who have their heart in the right place the most viable candidates. And that, in the most basic sense. And then, of course, we're disenfranchising entire swaths of voters. And, there's just so many issues. And what that leads to is a mistrust of politics. But the best way to counter that is to make sure that if you see somebody who's saying the right thing and they seem to have their heart in the right place, or you're that person that has their heart in the right place, that you help them, or of course you'll help yourself, but you stand up. I mean, I originally signed up from Harvard Square to the Oval Office, never with myself as a candidate in mind, ever, never did I imagine myself as a candidate. I just wanted to know how elections work so I could help a good candidate. And I know it's on film somewhere, I think, but I never wanted to be a candidate. But once I knew how it worked, I kind of got like, oh, okay, I could do this. But I think the best way to get people to trust politics is us. Politics is not some separate, corporate entity that is run by overlords. It's us, it's people. And if the right people step up to lead in the political arena, then you have better politics. It's really that simple, but it's not simple getting elected. I mean, especially if you're, I had stepped into the congressional arena for a bit and ended up stepping back for a lot of really complicated reasons. But I think if you have the passion and you can see yourself in that role and you can convince others that you should be in that role, then, learn everything you can to run the best campaign you possibly can. But keep in mind that if people don't trust politics, if they're so cynical, the way to break through that cynical is to show them a better way. And I think that's that would be my answer. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. I have to believe that at some point our politics will get, better. In all the ways I mentioned, but it's going to have to happen from the inside out, and with a lot of advocacy on the outside. So be that person who steps into the arena.
Thank you, Bob.
I just wanted to show you, this is the little kid coming back from school and looking at the workers building his home. And I just want to look at that smile.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
That's what it's about. That's what it's about. It's about doing what you can, whether it's in corporate America or whether it's in politics, doing what you can to advance other people to having a better life.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for a last set of questions. I'm going to combine a few, and they're primarily hoping for Deepa to weigh in, but then anyone, the floor is open, and we have 5 more minutes. We're going to try to combine 3 questions here. So Jamie, with a very interesting background, she's a retired active duty Army officer who is now on the Women's Advisory Group for the State National Guard, and is asking the question of how can we convince our leaders that unconscious bias in leadership really is an organizational issue. It's an organizational limitation. It is not a women's issue. And then kind of linking that question of unconscious bias, Kathleen is pointing out that, increasingly as the workforce is getting older, women will be facing this combination of biases due to their gender, due to their race, due to other things, but also due to age. And can we say something about that particularly vulnerable segment of our society? And of course, we all know from media that men can be broadcasters till they're, whatever age, and most women are much, much, much younger. So I think that's a very important question. And then also combined, I'm going to end with this Khadijah's question, our wonderful Oval Office student who introduced all of us. Yes, can we break these biases really individually? So unconscious bias is real. Women are counter-stereotypical leaders. What if you are called bossy? Have you ever been called bossy? And what do you do at that point? Deepa, that's a big.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions.
A lot here, but
Yeah.
I think it's really unconscious bias.
Yeah.
In particular against women as leaders, and then also against maybe mature women leaders.
Yeah. So I'll try and answer it at a high level and cover some of those things. So I think that really what, my book is about, and it feels like a lot of the conversation today is about, is really evolving the conversation on leadership overall. So I don't think it's just unconscious bias and structures. I think it's what historically has looked like a leader. What are the qualities that are important in different spaces, and how do we expand that so more of us are, thought of in the first round versus like we're an unusual, we're a first, we're an only. And that's part of what I think this conversation is about, that we are in a moment where there is more desire for more empathy, more leading with your gut, not just your head. And some of the qualities that we actually prioritize are starting to evolve in all of these sectors and spaces. So I do think that this is a larger, broader conversation on leadership. I think the second question on ageism, it's come up so much as I've had conversations over the last couple of days. So I do think that that is a growing issue and something we need to talk about. It's something I face much more looking too young. So I would constantly, and I still do, get asked, where is the more senior person, or where is that person? And for a long time, whenever I was even a senior partner, I'd be asked, like, where is the actual partner? Because there was a feeling of what that looked like, and that it had to be a much more senior, older person in their mind. And so I think we all face, the not being enough, whether it's too old, too young, too this, too that. And I think where I got to a place of understanding, and it was very practiced, was understanding that was really about them and not about me, and being really clear what I was going to own and take responsibility for. But that took a lot of work. And then I think on the third question, I think it's really about, for me, the work is about understanding what are the things that you have been taught as an individual. What are the things that you've been taught in institutions, through school, through media, and all of those things. And what are those things do you want to buy into? So how is your definition of success, your definition of leadership, your definition of how you want to work, shaped by other people versus yourself? And I call that the power of me. That we need to get clearer for ourselves how we stand, what we want, what we aspire to in life, and what our boundaries are. And once we have that, I think it's about finding the power of we. And so finding our sisters, finding other people that are having shared experience, so that we can go through it together. Because part of what I have found is it's the aloneness, it's the alienation, it's the stories that we're talking about. We're doing that separately versus kind of having conversation amongst all of us of how do we do this easier and better. And if I know I can call Lori and we're having similar experiences, even in other sectors, it's easier for me. So I think it's all of those things. I think there are ways to change structures and break barriers and biases. We need to talk about them more. We need to not accept them when they happen. And then we need to work together to change them. That's kind of how I would summarize all of that.
Wonderful. I think that working together, right, that's really a big topic that we hope we can leave with all of you, that you all can become support systems, supporters, micro-sponsors, help each other, lift each other up, become each other's voice. I don't think any of the people here on the screen have done it by themselves alone. It does require a community, it does require a village, as was famously said. So thank you. Thank you to Julene, thank you to Lori, thank you to Deepa for everything you have done for women, but really for the world, in lifting the world up, including that little boy that you helped them, Julene. And thank you also to Khadija for the beautiful introduction of the panelists, to Ruth, Nicole, and the whole Women in Public Policy program team for beautifully organizing the event today. And I do want to end with a moment of solidarity with our sisters, but also our brothers in Ukraine who are going through a horribly, horribly difficult time. And with that, thank you all very much. Those of you who are interested and have time for to learn more about International Women's Day, to get more inspiration, there is another event at 6 p.m. in the forum that you might want to check out. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining us today, and please go out in the world and elevate another person tonight. Thank you so much. Happy International Women's Day.